In my opinion, version 4.1 didn't really have a ton of juicy lore information or much in the way of cryptic quests, so I was actually planning to just merge this recap with 4.2's, especially since I think most of my theories for this patch have already been fleshed out in their own videos. But after watching the 4.2 special program, I kinda got the sense that we're about to be drowning in new information and things to speculate on. So I figured it's better to get this patch's recap out of the way before that happens. This video will therefore cover Acts 3 and 4 of Chapter 4's Archon quest, Neuvillette and Risley's story quest, Part 3 of the Narcissenkreuz world quest, also known as Unfinished Comedy, and the Fontaine Research Institute questline, followed by a few small theories and or observations. Now please note that my recap videos are not play-by-plays but more like highlight reels, so some things may be told out of order, glossed over, or lumped together to make the actual contents easier to follow, digest, and remember, because the point of recap videos is to be able to remember the contents. Alright, and with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's waste no more time and start things off by recapping Acts 3 and 4 of the Archon quest. Now, Act 3 doesn't start with a tea party, but that's really the first important scene here. Furina doesn't want to be alone with the knave, and so she coerces Neuvillette into attending the tea party with her as well. Now, Arlecchino's goal here at the tea party is to try to leverage Child in order to get a better look around Meripede. I believe she's trying to get there in order to find out if that's where the Gnosis is, because apparently Furina doesn't have it on her person, but she never really says this outright. Regardless, the request is denied as Neuvillette intends to send the Traveler instead, as, like a kind of third party. Not only does the Traveler know Child pretty well, but they're not really associated with the Fatui or Fontaine, so both parties can trust them pretty well. It makes them the perfect candidate for the job, so Neuvillette arranges some not exactly false charges, but kind of bogus charges. Like, he gives the Traveler a cake, and then the Traveler eats the cake, but the cake was meant for Furina because the gift was from Arlecchino to Furina, and apparently that is a crime in Fontaine, so now the Traveler is in Meripede for 45 days. It's a great plan there. Now, if you're wondering why we can't just show Arlecchino the vision to, prove to her that Child's okay, she wants to know his exact whereabouts and his exact condition. It's not enough to just tell her that he's alive. Especially since Child seems to have completely disappeared from Meripede. That makes the Traveler's job even harder. However, Arlecchino still wants to investigate the location of the Gnosis, so in addition to having the Traveler go to Meripede, she's also arranged for Linny and Lynette and Fremine to get arrested by putting on a street performance and stealing a bunch of people's wallets so that they can go around Meripede freely and, try to locate some stuff, scout out the area, see if the Gnosis is even there. And of course, the Traveler then ends up assisting Linny, Lynette, and Fremine on their investigations about all these weird little things going on in Meripede in the hopes that one of them will lead them to Child and or the Gnosis. But spoiler alert, as far as the Archon quest goes, there's nothing really weird going on in Meripede. Not with the meat or the vial of red liquid. I mean, everything there is basically just people's imaginations going a bit wild. Which isn't to say there isn't weird things going on in Meripede, they're just in other little tiny quests elsewhere. However, it is through all of this investigation that the Traveler does learn of the existence of a forbidden zone from Linny, and Linny thinks that this might be where the Gnosis is. But I'm sorry, Linny, that's not what's there. It's okay to be wrong. Now, throughout the rest of the Traveler's time within Meripede, Child's vision actually resonates with the Traveler and periodically gives them dreams that they use to retrace Child's movements, and eventually they use that to discover that he escaped Meripede altogether through a drainage pipe. The Traveler passes this information along to Linny, who sends Fremine to track down Child. Meanwhile, Lynette investigates information about the Forbidden Zone within the infirmary because there seems to be some suspicious actions going on in the infirmary. Fremine's expedition is not actually very successful, and he quickly loses Child's trail and ends up ingesting a lot of primordial seawater in the process. Apparently, this is because the primordial seawater has been leaching into the surrounding ocean, and that is a huge problem because the people of Fontaine dissolve in primordial seawater. Now, like any good prison warden, Risley has been monitoring the situation with everybody very, very carefully. And that is why Fremine ends up being saved by Clorinde, who was hired by Risley to assist with an upcoming crisis, which we'll get to in a second. During her investigation, Lynette gets tranquilized by Siegwin, and when Linny is unable to find her or ascertain Fremine's safety, he panics and confronts Risley about it. Risley plays the bad guy for a bit and tries to coerce Linny into arranging a meeting with Arlecchino, which Linny refuses to do, and I find this a bit confusing because Arlecchino had wanted to go to Meropide anyways, so I kind of feel like this entire quest could have been avoided altogether if we'd just escorted her here instead at the start, but hey, what do I know? I'm not the writer. In any case, Risley gives up and returns Linny's siblings unharmed, and then takes the Traveler to the Forbidden Zone, where there is no Gnosis, but actually a giant sluice gate which is holding back the primordial waters. And the sluice gate is also apparently about to burst, which is why the primordial waters were leaching into the nearby ocean, and that's what made Fremine sick in the first place. So Linny somehow manages to figure all of this stuff out on his own after he calms down a little bit. What he doesn't know is that Risley has an emergency plan for Fontaine, which is literally a giant boat, an ark. I mean, I guess people can't really drown and dissolve if they're in a boat, so I mean, it's a pretty good plan. I mean, he's the only one who's really been making plans for what looks like years at this point, so I mean, bravo, Risley, bravo. I really do hope that boat's close to being done, though, because shortly after this event, the sluice gate just breaks, just flat out breaks. Clarande and Risley try to hold back the primordial waters using the 3 containment gates and their visions, and then they send the Traveler to get Neuvillette, who happens to be on his way anyway and merely requests that the Traveler accompany Furina while he's busy so that she's not alone with Arlecchino. He then proceeds to use what draconic authority he has in order to force the primordial waters back into place and put a temporary seal on it. Later on, he implies that he can't hold the primordial waters back for very long, so we had better not rely on him, and we need a better, more permanent solution. This is also the point at which he reveals that he is the dragon sovereign of water, just straight up, with no ceremony whatsoever. And that's cool and all, but I think most of us kind of knew that already. He also adds that he doesn't have his full dragonhood, and none of the sovereigns do, and that's probably why he can't do anything about the primordial waters. So, it's just a temporary solution. We're good for now, at least. But while he was busy pushing back the primordial waters, Arlecchino loses her patience with Furina and interrogates her about what she's doing to protect the people of Fontaine about the prophecy, to which Furina can only say, "I am doing exactly what I am supposed to," which makes Arlecchino understandably frustrated as her goal is to save the people of Fontaine by whatever means necessary. And if the god of the nation won't tell you what the actual plan is, I can see why that would be pretty upsetting. Now, I could be a little bit off here, and this is speculation, but I kind of feel like Furina might not actually know what her plan is, which sounds kind of weird, but after seeing her character teaser, I think that this might be because her role in this whole play is just to play the role of a god and wait for this appointed time in which something is going to happen and everything will be okay. I've suggested in previous theories that there may be another, clone of Furina or another fragment of Agaria who actually knows what the plan is, and Furina has absolute faith in that fragment, and she just knows that her role is to play the role of a god. So she may not know what the real plan is, but she's very confident that she is doing her part to make sure that plan goes through. The video theory in question can be found here if you want to watch it. Interestingly, Arlecchino's hostility only seems to extend to Furina herself, as she's pretty amicable to the Traveler, and she does seem to be genuinely grateful for their treatment of her children. But not about Child, because she doesn't seem to care about Child at all, which is kind of ironic, because children, she likes children but doesn't like Child. I don't know, I think it's funny from a pun perspective, like a pun-spective. Arlecchino does mention that neither Furina nor Neuvillette feel like Archons, and neither of them seem to have the Gnosis that she's tracking down. Now, this kind of supports that idea I mentioned earlier about Furina not being a complete god or a complete Archon. She's just playing the role of one, and there may be a spark of divinity that she's, trapped somewhere else. Again, long and complicated. You can watch this video if you want to learn more about it. I'll just leave it there for now because that is the end of the quest. So let's move on and talk about the next quest, the Narsettenkreuz Part 3, also known as Unfinished Comedy. So if you completed the quest with the Little Oceanid Anne and the quest line in the Melazine village, you'll have a pretty good context for this new quest in Meropide. I have made a fully detailed summary of parts 1 and part 2 of this questline in my 4.0 recap video, so if you forgot what was going on in the storyline, I strongly suggest you go rewatch just that section of the video because I will be making a complete Narsettenkreuz quest summary after 4.2 because I think that will be the finale for it. But for now, I'm not going to recap everything that happened in 4.0 either because it's just very long and complicated, and just please don't make me animate that again right now. Anyway, in this part of the quest, we are following a character named Catter, which is short for Caterpillar. And yes, it is the same Caterpillar as mentioned by Julian in the desert if you happen to do that questline, and if you didn't, then just ignore this. Basically, this entire questline is the traveler helping Catter to get his friend Lenore back to what family she has left on the surface. Lenore was apparently born to an incarcerated woman named Agnes inside of Meripede, and recently Agnes died, so Catter doesn't see any reason for Lenore to still be in, like an exile's prison area, and he thinks she should be with the rest of her family, and I agree with him. So the goal is to get Lenore out of jail, and to do this we need to do a lot of little fetch quests and tasks to get credit coupons in order to win a contest which will help us get to the surface where we can hopefully just leave Lenore there, and I guess Catter doesn't mind going back to Meripede. But obviously, things do not go to plan because once on the surface, after we do win the contest, Catter reveals that he is actually a hilichurl, able to take the shape of a human. Which should be shocking, except it's not something that we haven't seen before. Except our last few encounters with humans shapeshifting into monsters and then back again was with a whopper flower that turned into albedo, and then, creatures like Enjo and other abyss lectors. So I guess the hilichurl part is new, but the concept itself isn't. Anyway, Catter and Lenore are then brought back to Meripede because he's a hilichurl and therefore not trustworthy. So we gotta go to Plan B, and Plan B is basically break out of jail the hard way. So in order to break out of jail, we have to travel through a mine, like a literal uranium mine. Which I think is kind of funny because I actually predicted back before Fontaine came out that Archeum is actually Genshin's magic uranium. And if you look at unprocessed uranium ore, yeah, it kind of checks out. They share the same coloring and all the same detrimental effects, and also its energy properties, which we'll talk about more when we go to the Fontaine Research Institute. But yeah, magical uranium, yay! So eventually we do manage to escape Meripede and we bring Lenore to her last remaining family member, and that is essentially the end of the quest. Except Catter decides to share a little bit of his history with us. He tells us that he was once a member of the Narcissenkreuz Ordo, and he was born from the Master, who also helped to shape his intelligence by teaching him language and how to read and, all kinds of stuff, including how to change his form so he wasn't stuck as a hilichurl all the time. Now, his master should be Renee de Petrichor, and it's heavily implied that Catter is actually Carter, reborn as Renee promised to do for him. Now, if you remember from the quests in 4.0, Renee died in a confrontation inside of Elenis, and apparently this explosion and stuff inside of Elenis kind of alerted this whole investigation into what the Narcissenkreuz Ordo was actually doing. And through that process, Catter was discovered, and that's how he ended up in Meripede. He was basically put on trial, found guilty of being an accomplice, and yeah, so he's in prison. Now, you may be wondering what the implications are that a human can basically die and be reborn as a hilichurl, and it just so happens I made a whole video about that, and you can go watch it if you want to, because I'm not going to elaborate. But anyway, now that Catter isn't stuck in Meripede anymore, he is free to do whatever he wants, so he decides to go back to the Ordo's headquarters, which is in the Natural Philosophy Institute underwater. It's in this headquarters that he meets up with Anne and Seymour. Now, these are characters that we met in the previous two parts of this questline, and he tells them a little bit about this Red Empress character, or rather, Lyris. Now, Lyris was the Oceanid director from the Narcissenkreuz orphanage, from which the Narcissenkreuz Ordo was established. Now, I think this is the first time that we get explicit, overt confirmation that Lyris is the orphanage director, but I could be wrong on that. It could have already been confirmed and I just don't remember, so yeah. There are a lot of other little tidbits that he says that I think are definitely worth talking about, but I kind of want to refrain from doing that right now because I want to wait until the end of the quest line, because they're all a little bit cryptic and I think they'll make much more sense after 4.2. I'm just spitballing, but yeah. Anyway, overall, the unfinished comedy quest is actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and there's not a whole lot to it apart from, few big worm bombs. So, hey, good times. Why don't we move on and talk about the Fontaine Research Institute of Kinetic Engineering questline? The premise for this quest is basically this. The Fontaine Research Institute exploded due to an accident involving Edwin Eastinghouse's experiments with Archeum, so the traveler joins a researcher named Knacker to try and salvage the situation. Like I mentioned earlier, Archeum is basically Genshin's magic uranium, so a lot of the tasks here are centered around trying to mitigate the damage within the fallout zone of the explosion and to, monitor the situation. Part of this task involves retrieving the experimental field generator, which is unfortunately stuck on floating debris up in the sky, which is why they need the traveler's help in the first place. They kind of need some help getting up there. So it seems like the point of this research was to find a way to create a floating city so that Fontaine could just float in the air and never drown due to the prophecy. And that's kind of why everything's floating. Now, to do this, they needed an immense amount of energy, hence the Archeum, uranium, radioactive nuclear power. You get the parallels to real-world history there, right? So the field generator itself apparently has some level of control over gravity. However, the Archeum reactor that powers it is not super stable. Also a pretty familiar historical parallel. All of the researchers that are left in the area are pretty scared that it's going to explode, and that's also why they want to shut it down very discreetly, so this reporter doesn't know, and that is really the real goal of this mission. So, once the traveler gets up there, Knacker is supposed to stay up there and shut it down, and he says that he can do it alone and that he'll be able to get back down on his own because, yay, gravity manipulation with the field generator. So we leave him up there, because that's a great idea, and, Knacker then decides it would be a great idea to just blow the whole place up and disappear because, he's not actually a good dude, and that's the plot twist. Knacker is apparently someone who's been stealing data and components and then selling them for a ton of money, and he also used to work directly with Edwin Eastinghouse, and apparently Edwin is also not that nice of a guy. The entire quest kind of subtly paints Edwin and his companions as brilliant but not all that humane of people, as they call him an inhuman monster and then lament how he's damaged the reputation of the Institute forever. But, given how open-ended this whole quest is, I kind of doubt this is the final installment to the story. I kind of hope that in the next part, which may or may not be in 4.2, we actually get to meet Edwin, because apparently no one thinks he's really dead. So yeah, the quest seems to end with Knacker going completely missing and the generator properly shut down, so that's a great thing. Yeah. In the meantime, let's move on. I have more stuff to talk about. Risley's story quest had some weirdly juicy bits to it, and I don't really know what to make of it right now. Most of it was surrounding this weird as heck rock, which is actually just this stone that's full of concentrated fear juice. Because apparently this one dude created this whole beret society, and he was basically controlling everybody by jabbing their heads with needles that had been dipped in this fear juice in order to make them experience their worst fears, and then he leveraged this power of fear to control and manipulate them, and then he hid their wounds with their beret. The whole thing is incredibly messed up, but after this guy gets brought to justice, we got to learn some things about Risley. Like straight from him, which was cool. He tells us that he was an orphan who was taken in by some foster parents who ended up turning out to be child slave traders. So then he murdered them to protect the rest of his kids and siblings, and that apparently got him sent to Meripede on murder charges, and the administrator of Meripede at the time was a tyrannical piece of work, so at some point towards the end of his sentence, Risley challenged him to a duel to see if he could make things better for the people there. And the admin, I guess, kind of just pieced out and ran away. So Risley just waltzed into his office and was like, I guess this is my job now. And he took over the entire fortress. Risley is hilarious and I love him. Now, Neuvillette's story quest is kind of the complete opposite of Risley's. Most of it is completely introspective. Neuvillette explains that although he is part of Fontaine's society, because he is a dragon, he also kind of exists outside of it, and therefore he struggles at times to understand his role in the grander scheme of things. This quest also explains how Neuvillette discovered the Melazine race and brought them into the city, and that includes all of the challenges that went along with integrating two very different species together into one society. There was apparently a lot of resistance in the early days, like 400 years ago, and Neuvillette blamed himself a lot for the death of one particular Melazine named Carol, since he was unable to protect her from prejudiced people who wanted to harm her and didn't want Melazines integrated into Fontainian society at all. But after Carol was murdered, her partner, the Mason Gardiennage, Vautrin, ended up getting revenge for her death by killing her killers. And Neuvillette had to perform the very difficult task of punishing him for breaking the law, regardless of his own personal feelings on the matter. Now, this incident from 400 years ago is kind of mirrored during the present time of the quest, as another Melusine named Chiara is being threatened by a man named Domenico via letters from Meropide. As it turns out, Domenico was being thwarted by the Mutual Aid Network, which had been founded by Vautrin 400 years ago in order to help the other prisoners come to terms with the wrongs of their past and work together towards a better future. Neuvillette then realized that Vautrin didn't actually resent him back then, and instead he had understood Neuvillette was in a difficult position. So he had put on a show of false anger so the people of Fontaine truly understood that Neuvillette was an impartial, trustworthy Iudex. He knew that if the people had a good opinion of Neuvillette, then they would trust his judgment about the Melusines. We also got to learn a little bit about why Neuvillette struggles so much with understanding his own emotions. Apparently, water contains people's most intense emotions, so as the Dragon of Water, he ends up feeling those emotions from everywhere all the time. It's only natural then that he tries to suppress his feelings in order to simply function on the day-to-day. At the very end of his quest, too, we get some very suspicious lines from Farina, which I think foreshadow the events of 4.2, which, we'll see as soon as it comes out. I guess if you play his quest after 4.2 comes out, then it's more of a reference than foreshadowing, but 4.2 isn't out here as of time of recording, so, yeah. So that just about does it for all of the quest recaps for this patch, which means it is finally time for a rapid-fire roundup of a bunch of little observations and neat tidbits that you may have missed that I think are cool and want to share. Let's start off with some surprising Harbinger lore. We all spent a lot of time in Meropide, and in doing so, we were forced to learn the value of its unique currency, the credit coupons. But did you know that this fiscal system was actually developed and implemented by Pantalone? It is true! Risley's signature weapon talks all about it. He wanted to trial a new type of currency that would have the least amount of risk of being tampered with by anything divine, so Meropide was obviously the perfect place for it. This weapon also confirms that Pantalone is not from Liyue, as many suspected him to be. Still don't know what his real hometown is. Now, the event for this patch was a little tepid as far as lore is concerned, but there were a couple of neat things about it towards the end when we finally got to confirm the true identity of Calaroe. She was an Oceanid who fled from Fontaine hundreds of years ago and settled in the waters of Springvale, earning herself the nickname of Spring Fairy in the process. She became a bit of a local legend and was the one responsible for blursing Diona with the ability to always make delicious drinks no matter what she does. Now, this event also gave us some nice closure to her relationship with Finch, an old man who has literally been standing by her pond talking about her since the very beginning of the game. His steadfast commitment to her touched her heart so hard that she gifted him with an egg, I think? I'm not really sure if that's what that is, but that's kind of what it looks and feels like to me given all the context, so that's what I'm gonna call it. It's an ocean egg. Now, Mondstadt is kind of odd because it doesn't really have any magic races of its own with the exception of the cat's lines, but they're not really equated to races like the yokai. Or so we thought. During the poetry event, Zhao comments that Diona actually has Adeptal affinity, which is quite curious. The Adepti are also known as illuminated beasts, so I suppose it makes sense that someone with the traits of a beast or animal could be lumped into that category, but one thing that the Adepti seem to all possess is a blessing given to them by Morax. Now, Diona has a blessing given by Calaroe, so now I'm wondering if the blessing part is more important than the beast part. Although we do know that humans can't be called Adepti, although they can learn Adeptal arts. But then we've got like Yenfei and Ganyu who are only half human and both of them are considered Adeptus. So maybe you need both blood and a blessing. I don't really know where I'm going with that. It's just, I thought this was worth mentioning for future reference. Maybe it'll come up again. One last thing for this patch, and it's a biggie. This patch is the earliest possible patch where you can get the Fontaine Windglider, and the lore within it is pretty juicy and long. So here's the highlights. The Primordial Sea used to belong to the Hydro Dragon Sovereign, and when the Primordial one took over, they killed the Hydro Dragon, and then one of their shades, the Shade of Life, created Egeria to take over as the heart of the primordial sea, which had previously belonged to the Hydro Dragon. Now, this makes Egeria one of the oldest gods we have on record, up there with the likes of Zhongli. Now, after the god king Remus and his civilization of Remuria fell, Egeria was awarded, quote, a shard of the one who was first, which also gave her the title of Archon as well as a divine duty. Something worth paying attention to is that this shard and the Heart of the Sea may or may not be two different things with two different roles, and I'm not sure which is the Gnosis. The one who was first may be the Dragon King Nibelung, since he was the first king of Tevat, that we know of anyway, or it may be the primordial one. I am going to refrain on sharing my opinion on this because I have a feeling 4.2 is going to give us a lot more information to work with that will completely change how we think about the Gnosis. But I wanted to bring it up anyway because I feel like it's going to be really important. Alright, I think that just about does it for the recap this time. Usually I have a few more theories and more speculations, but this time I'm releasing the recap a bit late, and I feel like most of my fully fleshed or interesting theories already have their own videos that you can check out if you're really interested in them. Anything else that I have is basically speculations on the next patch, and that's just a different type of video, so I'm excluding them for now. Anyway, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching, and of course a very special thank you as always to all of my beautiful channel members for all of your support. I really couldn't do this without you, and I mean that. We are about to get pummeled with a massive lore storm of theory-breaking proportions in the next patch, so I hope you've all got a life vest or two handy. I'm gonna go find mine, because I don't know where it is, so hopefully I'll see you all in the next video, okay? Take care of yourselves, and bye for now.